Our last panel today is an interactive discussion between Senator Golden and a number of key Oregon stakeholders. So I'd like to welcome back Senator Golden.
Thank you very much. I'll let our panelists arrive. Sure enjoyed that last panel very much. And in fact, both of the first two panels, I think, were really useful in setting a foundation for what we want to do in this final panel of the day. And that's a conversation among people representing sectors, organizations, communities that are going to be key to the legislative process coming up on clean energy. All of these will definitely have a place at the table as we deliberate a path towards fully clean energy. I expect they'll all want a place at the table, and I know that we legislators really want them at the table because we can't do the best policy making possible without them. So we don't really have opening statements. I do have an opening question I'd like each panelist to start with, but here's my thinking on how we will proceed. I do have, let me find the list here. We have 9 people on this panel. They are representing Portland General Electric, PacifiCorp, the Oregon Citizens Utility Board, the advocacy group Verde, the BlueGreen Alliance, the Eugene Water and Electric Board, the Oregon Municipal Electrical Utilities Association, Climate Solutions, and Renewable Northwest. This is not an exhaustive list of folks who will be helping us shape policy, but it's an impressive one, I think. And what I'd like to do, I'm going to ask you, call on you one by one with an opening question. And you can, this is the idea of the question. You can improvise as you'd like. I'd like to know, first of all, what is the core purpose or function of your organization? So we all know that. And then in a not more than a couple minutes, what excites you most and what concerns you most about the prospect of achieving carbon-free electricity for Oregon within the next 20 or 25 years? What excites you? What concerns you about that prospect? And then after that first round, I'd like to do a second round. I encourage you to just note anything you hear in the first round that you'd like to comment on or ask for elaboration on or challenge or support in the second round. And that's how we'll get started. Also, if there's anything you've heard today that you especially would like to comment on, that would be fine in the second round too. After we do that, we got plenty of questions. We'll take questions from those listening as well. We won't have too much time for this panel. We're actually going to be going to 3:45, but we're going to fill that time, I think, really well. So this is in no particular order, but I'd like to hear first from Sunny Radcliffe, who's the Director of Government Affairs and Environmental Policy at Portland General Electric.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thanks to the organizer of the conference. We're really pleased to be a part of it, and it's been a really interesting day full of useful information and good to be a part of this. So I'm part of Portland General Electric, as you mentioned. So we are the largest investor-owned utility in the state of Oregon. We serve about 70% of the GDP of the state. Our service territory goes sort of it's nested in the valley. We have a compact service territory, and so we're serving folks from essentially the Columbia River down to Salem and from the crest of the Coast Range to the crest of the Cascades. Our mission is to serve our customers with reliable and affordable and increasingly clean power because, of course, our customers' expectations and wants and needs are evolving. And what we want to provide to them is evolving. And so that sort of leads me to, I think, what we're excited about. We're very excited about building the affordable, reliable, and equitable clean energy future that our customers expect and that we want. And that's why we set out recently a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with serving our customers' load. In other words, the energy that we're providing to customers by at least 80% below our 2010 levels by 2030. We also set an aspirational new goal of zero greenhouse gas emissions associated with the power we serve customers to 100% clean or non-emitting by 2040. It is aspirational, that last 20%, because we know, as I think everyone around the country knows, and we certainly heard in today's panel discussions or various presenters' discussions, there are going to have to be some policy, regulatory, and technical changes to fully eliminate emissions from the power supply. And we're frankly looking forward to working with folks at the federal, state, and the local level to bring that forward. I do want to just note that we have two 2040 goals. I think earlier on, it might have been Greg who mentioned that we had a 2040 net zero goal. Our power supply goal is not net zero. It is absolute zero. Our net zero is enterprise-wide and is meant to encompass all of our enterprise emissions, including our transportation, our building, et cetera. So that one is 100% net zero, but just wanted to be very, very clear that with regard to the power we serve our customers with, our eye is on getting to 100% absolute emissions free.
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you very much. Next, please, Scott Bolton from PacifiCorp. Could you tell us, Scott, your organization's core purpose and how would you summarize your major concern and major source of excitement about 100% clean?
You bet. Thanks, Senator Golden, and thanks other panelists and members of the legislature. We sell electricity. And we're the second largest investor-owned utility in Oregon. We're quite spread out. We serve from Astoria to Joseph, from Portland and Sherman County to Klamath Falls and Medford, and our Oregon's largest rural electricity provider as one company. But we're also part of a regional utility. So folks here in Oregon know us through our retail brand, Pacific Power. We serve Oregon, Washington, and California as Pacific Power. We serve Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah as Rocky Mountain Power, but it's all one company across that 6-state, 2 million customer footprint. And, there's a lot of benefits that come from that regional footprint, and kind of best of all worlds, we can piece together an amazing array of different renewable resources and optimize around that. We are the largest private transmission system owner in the West, and next to BPA are the largest transmission provider in the Pacific Northwest. So we're big on the infrastructure side of the equation. So I would just say, and I'll be very brief here. I think what's exciting is, I got my start at this company in 2004. It was really at the outset of when renewable portfolio standards were starting to be debated across states, particularly here in the West, after California adopted theirs, and got to be a part of the craftsmanship of a number of initiating renewable policies. And I think where we stand today is we're really seeing the fruits of that labor, and there's a lot of paths that I think are leading to the transition that we're witnessing on the grid right now. But there's kind of three big ones that actually kind of pick up on the previous panel's discussions that we're working with and benefiting from and utilizing to kind of create a snowball effect of cleaner energy and decarbonization in the system. The first really does start with policy. There's a role for policy. And I described, really because there wasn't kind of centralized action out of the federal government, states really started to take policy in their own hands on energy. And we started seeing a suite of different clean energy or renewable portfolio standards that, really swept across the country through kind of the early to, 2000s to about, 2010, 2012. And that really set the investment environment for renewables. It created a regulatory and market construct that really welcomed investment in this area and started sending signals around what policymakers did want to see more of and what they wanted to see less of. And that's really been, I think, kind of kickstarting some of the clean energy revolution. But the other piece that really can't be discounted has been the role of, ironically, the federal tax code and the production tax credit for wind, the investment tax credit for solar. These incentives have really rapidly driven down the costs of renewable resources to the point where they are at or below parity with traditional thermal power supply resources. I would note, though, that even though renewables are now competitive with other forms of generation, those incentives, I believe, personally speaking, I think are still necessary, because as we talk about some of the complementary infrastructure that we need to really integrate renewables and make the system work better and cleaner, and that is really battery storage, that's transmission, it really is the effect of these incentives still being available for wind and solar and other clean technologies that frankly help subsidize and bring in a better economic case to bring these resources online. So we, as of the end of 2020, bleeding over a little bit into this year, have just completed a massive project of new wind development, repowering our existing wind fleet, and the pairing and the power cost savings that comes from those investments have helped lower the cost of critical transmission lines to move that power around. So now we're getting to the point of how do we start pairing these technologies in ways and leveraging the incentives to bring these into the system. And then kind of the last point really is market innovation that really hasn't been driven directly by state or federal policy, but has really emerged as a result of the need to integrate renewables, the need to better manage resources and reliability. And that really can be seen through the creation of the Western Energy Imbalance Market. PacifiCorp led that with the California ISO in 2014. Since then, over more than half of Western load serving utilities are in that marketplace now. It's saved consumers over $1 billion and has lowered emissions along the way. And so when you look at where we are, whether through luck or design, the combination of state policies, of federal policies, and just innovation and just good business sense coming from the private sector have actually, meaningfully started decarbonizing the grid, added, thousands of megawatts of new renewable energy, and frankly, we've been doing it in a way that's been very cost conscious and affordable, and actually lowering power costs. You heard earlier how much cheaper electricity is becoming in the marketplace. At times, that's even a problem that we've lowered costs so much. So we're constantly looking at ways that we're managing and adapting to that environment, but we're making progress.
Thank you, Scott. Bob Jenks is Executive Director of the Oregon Citizens Utility Board. Bob, a little on CUB and bright spot and concerning spot about 100% clean for you.
Yeah, I'm Bob Jenks. I'm with the Citizens Utility Board. We're an advocate for residential customers of utilities here in Oregon, and have been around since the early 80s doing that. For me, we look at the need to go to 100% clean and simply to decarbonize our energy system as a fact. It's just a given. It's the cards we're dealt. It's what science tells us we simply have to do. So it's not a choice. It's the question is, how do we do it? And in Oregon, we've been doing it in a pretty thoughtful, collaborative manner From our viewpoint, the start of decarbonization really began with the RPS in 2008, and then we've done a series of policies, coal to clean and other things since then. One of the things that's, I think, important to recognize is if you look at Portland General Electric residential bills, they declined more than 5% since 2008, since we did the initial RPS. So we've been able to make dramatic progress on decarbonization, but at the same time keeping bills affordable. And I think that's in our mind is really, really important. The things that allow us to do that are commitment to energy efficiency, which drives usage down, which helps with keeping those bills low, integrated resource planning, a competitive bidding for large projects, and really the sense of collaboration that we have here in the state. The parties in Oregon work together. I'm part of a national network of consumer advocates. Few states have the ability to sort of collaborate with utilities and environmentalists and climate activists and equity stakeholders the way that we do in Oregon. So I think, in my belief, there's a challenge for us, but it's a challenge we can meet. But it's going to take a lot of work. We've got to work together. We've got to keep our focus on affordability. We've got to address the equity concerns that relate to the energy system. But it's a challenge that to me, I'm excited because it's a challenge that is solvable. We can do it. We can go to 100% clean on a pretty rapid timetable. And I believe we can do it while continuing to keep our energy bills affordable.
Thank you, Bob, very much. Next is Oriana Magnera. She is the Energy, Climate, and Transportation Program Manager for Verde. Hello, Oriana, and if you tell us just a little bit about Verde and your opening thoughts about 100% clean.
Thanks, Senator, and thanks to the folks who put this really incredible webinar together. I've learned a lot so far, and I think this is a really generative conversation that is very needed in this moment. A little bit about my organization, Verde. We've been around for about 15 years. We operate out of the Cully neighborhood in Portland, which is the neighborhood nearest the airport. It's also a neighborhood that's on a diesel trucking corridor, that has an asphalt grinding facility, that has a glass recycling facility, is right by the train tracks that are actually across the diesel corridor from our office. And we also have some pollution from shipping on the Columbia River. So it's an environmental justice community, which means a community that's disproportionately impacted by environmental health hazards, like all of these things I just described, that have very important purposes in our economy, but are often cited in communities that are mostly Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, or folks with lower incomes, or both, which is the case with Cully. And those folks often bear the costs of progress and economic development. And a big part of what Verde wants to do is to ensure that the communities who are most impacted by our systems are the ones who benefit first and who are not harmed as we make progress going forward with new technologies and the new green economy. And so our mission is to build environmental wealth for communities through organizing, advocacy, and social enterprise, putting people to work, ensuring that we have good policies that benefit the communities that we're trying to serve, and then organizing with those communities to have community-led policy development that really drives from the needs of those communities who are most impacted by particular issues and ensure that their voices are helping to shape the solutions we see, because we believe that the people who are closest to a problem or a challenge are also the people who have the most insight into the best possible solutions and strategies to tackle that challenge and problem. And to talk about the challenge of achieving 100% clean or 100% renewable energy in Oregon's system, I want everybody to jump in your time machines to start and imagine our screens going wavy and the music playing as we go back to 1936, when the Rural Electrification Act was passed. And that was kind of the last really pivotal point in our energy system, in which we transitioned from the system as it was, in which you had a lot of electrification in urban areas. Utilities were trolley companies also and ran transportation. So as utilities come back around and build transportation electrification infrastructure, they're becoming transportation companies again, which is an interesting parallel. But a lot of rural communities didn't have access to energy. And it was a big equity issue between urban centers that had access to things like refrigeration that came with electrification, that had access to jobs and manufacturing, that had access to all of these things that not having electricity was a really big barrier for. And so the Rural Electrification Act was passed in order to achieve equity and parity in terms of access to the energy system and ensure that we expanded our transmission and distribution systems to reach all communities around the United States. So that's an incredible benefit and a way to achieve equity and access. But in the Northwest in particular, this came at an incredible cost, which in putting a lot of people to work in creating access to electricity, we needed new sources of energy to make that happen. And we built our hydropower system, which is kind of the foundation of our regional energy system in the Northwest. But the cost that came with that was the loss of cultural and natural resources of economic trading places like Celilo Falls for Indigenous communities. So what we really want to see in terms of what excites us about the possibility of 100%, but also is a concern that we want to make sure is addressed in any policy making, is that we don't do further harm to the communities who've been impacted through this work, that we create benefit, that we prioritize through something called targeted universalism. Those communities, environmental justice communities like those in the Cully neighborhood, who are mostly Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, folks with lower incomes, and rural and coastal communities who bear the costs of our changing climate and who bear the costs of our energy system, to ensure that they're prioritized in a way that Indigenous communities were not in that transition that we made in the 1930s from urban electrification to more universal electrification. And that's not to say that we feel like we need to remove all the dams right now, although we do want to see some parity and restitution come to tribes in how we think about expanding 100%, especially if it leans on hydropower to achieve that vision of 100% clean, and also acknowledge the many utilities that already have a lot of hydropower in our system. We want to make sure that it doesn't come at new costs, that there are new communities who are disadvantaged in the process, but that we're really bringing along and prioritizing impacted and environmental justice communities first through this vision. So part of what brings us to this table today is we're working with a number of other environmental justice organizations with support in policy development, although not necessarily signed onto the coalition yet, from other allied organizations, to develop a vision for 100% that drives from community need, one that's grounded in good labor standards and good jobs for communities, that's grounded in community energy projects that create economic opportunity in rural communities that are hurting with lots of job losses, even before the pandemic, but that are amplified right now. And ensuring that we do this in a way that is really not just equitable, but just, and really forward thinking, that we transform our energy system, not just in terms of where the electrons are coming from, but who benefits from that system, that no one is burdened by that system unnecessarily, and that we're creating opportunity for all, that universal access to energy is extending beyond just who gets to turn on a light switch and have electricity come into their home. We really want to see this opportunity be as broad and expansive as possible.
Oriana, thank you very much. Next is Ranfis Villatoro. He's with the BlueGreen Alliance. He is the Oregon State Coordinator. Ranfis, if you tell us a little bit about the BlueGreen Alliance and your opening thoughts, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. Ranfis Giannettino Villatoro with BlueGreen Alliance. We're a national organization founded between the United Steelworkers, one of our largest manufacturing sector unions in North America, and the Sierra Club. And our mission is to address our environmental challenges while creating good quality jobs. We don't believe that those two things are in distinction or in conflict, but can be very much complementary. We have chapters in DC that focuses on federal work, chapters in the Midwest, and chapters throughout the West Coast. And I, of course, lead the Oregon chapter. And we are comprised of some local steering committee members that includes Climate Solutions, hi Meredith, and as well as other labor partners, including the Oregon AFL-CIO, IBW, Building Trades, just to name a few. I think what excites us about 100% policy, working with labor environmental partners, is the opportunity to address, again, our environmental challenges, our climate needs, as well as creating good quality jobs, especially in areas such as our rural communities, our coastal communities, the opportunities to diversify those communities and the types of jobs that we could potentially see. So what gets us excited are talking about projects like solar, wind, offshore wind, storage, different storage technologies. We know that to truly decarbonize, we're going to need to build it. We're going to need to produce it, manufacture it. We're going to need to maintain it. And we're also probably, as we heard in the last panel, we're going to need to reduce our energy consumption. So again, those are going to require workers, frontline workers, essential workers, to be in the front lines to helping address our environmental challenges. And I think there's an opportunity to make sure that these sectors are diversified. We have disparities in this industry for women and people of color. And we have opportunities, and we've seen this in states like Washington, California, that led the charge, that when we embed workforce equity standards and policies in our energy renewable development policies, we can diversify, and we should diversify our industries. And I think, so I think I'm definitely excited for that opportunity. And this opportunity becomes magnified during this pandemic, when we have seen reports, especially from E2, that the first who've been most impacted from job losses have been women and people of color. And we're starting to see even the recovery, those are women and people of color are the slowest to regain their jobs, and as we see some jobs recover, and that's really true in the clean energy space. And so I believe that's an indictment in our current economic system. And I think we, all stakeholders, have a role to play in making sure that we create a better system for the future. And that includes agencies, utilities, developers, contractors, unions, and non-union apprenticeship programs. So it's going to take many hands to create that. And I think what gives me pause in any energy transition we've seen historically, but even I think as we'll see now, is that we see the divorce between workers and the technology needed to decarbonize. We can't separate those two things. Workers are a critical infrastructure to meeting our future energy needs and decarbonizing. We cannot divorce that reality. I have worked in the past with day laborers, immigrant populations that have seen the least amount of protections in construction. And I've seen these individuals 50, 60 years old who point to me to buildings that they've helped construct. Buildings that are generating tons of amount of wealth for those occupants and folks who dwell in those buildings, only to see that their bodies, that they have no path to retirement, and their bodies really can no longer support their work in the future. And the renewable construction industry is no different. We need to ensure that workers have a path to competitive wages, access to benefits and retirement, and that the access to those benefits need to be equitably distributed towards women and people of color. So those things continue to give me pause in any energy transition, and of course the potential displacement for fossil fuel workers, especially in coal mining. So coal plants. So when we look at plants even outside of our state, we have to ask, what is our state's responsibility to ensuring that we're transitioning those workers from those coal facilities? What is our responsibility to those workers, to those families, and to those communities? And those are challenging conversations, but I believe it's a conversation that should be coming before policymakers, utilities, developers, contractors, all folks to address how do we do that? Because our country and even our state has had a challenge of transitioning those workers. And I think we have some learned lessons even within our state. Those things give me pause, but I think we're in this position at BlueGreen Alliance to take on those conversations head on, and we look forward to this conversation in this year and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranfis. Next, Jason Heiser, who is Public Policy and Government Affairs Program Manager for Eweb, the Eugene Water and Electric Board. Jason, welcome. Tell us a little about Eweb and your focus on this.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Thanks for having me. Go Ducks, class of 1996. I am with the hometown utility. Like our other utility colleagues, we're a municipal utility, and our mission is to provide clean, affordable, and reliable electricity, as well as water, We are a customer-owned utility. Our customers are our owners and shareholders. We primarily serve the Eugene city limits, although we do have customers up the McKenzie River Valley, as well as some generation projects on the McKenzie River. And please keep all those folks on the McKenzie in your mind as a fire-affected area. For Eweb, I think what excites us the most about clean energy opportunities is we can do it. If you look at the Paris Agreement, we can deliver our responsibilities towards those goals here in the Northwest. We can decarbonize, and if we do it right, we can do it affordably. So that's an exciting opportunity for us. It won't be easy. It's not without cost, but we can do it. We also know that towards the end of decarbonization, clean energy can deploy other benefits in our region, whether it's health or resiliency. Those are important peripheral benefits. Ourselves in Eugene, we're actually exploring the possibility of renewable hydrogen. We've signed an MOU with Northwest Natural to explore the construction of one of North America's largest green hydrogen production facilities. It's pretty exciting. It's a multi-purpose opportunity that could provide storage of surplus wind and solar when demand is low and the grid's clean. It could also provide resiliency benefits. It'd be nice to have some fuel cells and hydrogen down here in the event of an earthquake. And it can afford us an opportunity to help the city of Eugene meet climate goals for reducing emissions in the transportation sector, especially heavy vehicles, transit buses that may not be great candidates for battery vehicles. The energy density of renewable hydrogen is pretty exciting. So wanted to share that current event at Eweb. When it comes to larger policy issues for the state of Oregon, I think Eweb supports least cost approaches to reducing carbon emissions. We've found through 2 Northwest studies that we've been part of that carbon pricing is the least cost policy to reduce emissions. That's a conclusion supported by the Northwest Power Council's 7th Power Plan. The use of regional surplus hydropower in the region is a crucial component of a least cost approach to reducing carbon in the region. We understand carbon pricing doesn't really have a political path forward in Oregon for the moment. So we understand why there's a pivot to looking at clean energy standards and the next increment there. We would say we highly advise the legislature to examine the elements of carbon pricing that make it the least cost policy approach to reducing carbon and try to adapt those elements for inclusion in any future clean energy legislation Oregon endeavors to pass. Chief among that is the element of technology neutrality. Eweb feels strongly that any future clean energy policy should have all non-emitting sources of electricity count equally. No restriction on type, size, and age. It's a crucial component of a least cost approach that would benefit consumers as we strive to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. I just also wanted to note, one concern is ensuring that we have adequate energy supply to meet load in the region. Most folks have heard about the resource adequacy discussion in the region. I think occasionally I hear people describe it as a problem from all the new renewables that we're using to replace fossil fuels. I want to stress it is not a renewables issue. It's a planning issue. It is a planning issue. It's one that we need to tackle. I'm confident we will. There's a great effort underway in coordination with the Northwest Power Pool to ensure that we standardize and coordinate resource adequacy so we can avoid close calls when it comes to the reliability of the grid. We just need to make sure our future clean energy policy is compatible with the effort to guarantee resource adequacy in the region. And I'm hopeful that the resource adequacy conversation, which is a regional one in nature, can be a great springboard towards propelling other regionalization and coordination. I think a lot of the solutions to decarbonizing the West and the Northwest really depend on regionalization. My colleague Scott Bolton talked about the energy imbalance market. Markets that can unlock greater efficiency in how we use the transmission system and the electric system. Those are key goals that we can pursue through market solutions to help make it easier to integrate renewables and to have that decarbonized future. So I'm hopeful that we can all work together to create that clean energy future that's affordable and reliable for our customers.
Jason, thank you very much. I'd like to go next to Jennifer Joly, who's director of the Oregon Municipal Electric Utilities Association. Jennifer, I think I recognize your background. It looks like a very peaceful place to visit.
Compared to DC, yeah.
Welcome, and let us know a little bit about your organization, your initial thoughts.
Thanks, Senator Golden. I'm Jennifer Joly with the Oregon Municipal Electric Utilities Association, OMEU, and we represent 11 of the city-owned utilities, all of them except Eugene. And those are Ashland, Bandon, Canby, Cascade Locks, Drain, Forest Grove, Hermiston, McMinnville, Milton Freewater, Monmouth, and Springfield. So we have a number of different sizes of utilities, and they're all over the state. And unlike Eweb, OMEU utilities are all full requirements utilities of the BPA, which means that we rely almost entirely on BPA for all of our power, which comes from the 31 federal dams on the Columbia and Snake Rivers and the Columbia Generating Station in Richland. What excites us most about the prospect of achieving a carbon-free electricity generation for Oregon is seeing other utilities follow the lead of consumer-owned utilities, which we've long enjoyed a nearly carbon-free energy mix, up to 97%. I think Sarah pointed that out this morning from Washington State. Depending on the water year and how many market purchases are necessary, our fuel mix is very clean. The only time fossil resources come into play is when BPA needs to make market purchases and it can attribute it to a specific resource. So it's assigned as an emissions factor. So it may include natural gas, but it could just as easily be wind. They call it the unspecified resource. And through sound and forward-looking decisions made at the local level, our cities have decided to form municipal utility systems for the benefit of the public to provide power at cost. Early advocates of public power fought to form municipal utilities and clear the way for the formation also of co-ops and PUDs. And through our willingness to provide power at cost, not for profit, we are entitled to a statutory preference and have a priority for the purchase of power from the federal system. Many of our utilities have been BPA customers for decades, providing low carbon power to our ratepayers. And as consumer-owned utilities, we don't want to be penalized for higher costs when we've been doing the right thing for our communities and the environment for a long time. What concerns us are threats to reliability and costs. It has taken 130 years to build the system that we have, and we're going to be demanding more of the system by fuel switching and accelerating EVs, and we need to be careful that we don't bite off more than we can chew without truly understanding the implications. If we want to get to 100% clean in 20 years, it'll be difficult considering some of the siting issues with transmission and the development of new intermittent renewables. However, even more troublesome is the call by the state of Oregon to remove significant cost-effective non-emitting resources like the lower Snake River dams, which produce an average of 1,100 average megawatts, enough to power 800,000 homes. Losing these resources and replacing them with intermittent carbon-free resources like wind and solar will raise BPA's power supply rates 50%. And for OMEU members, that would translate to a 25% rate increase for our customers. Hydropower is the backbone of our low carbon emissions electric grid and the key to integrating intermittent renewables onto the grid and really achieving our aggressive carbon reduction goals. And we certainly need to keep this clean, reliable energy resources that are already here in the region. So I guess those would be our main concerns.
Thank you, Jennifer. Would like to hear next from Meredith Connolly, who's the Oregon Director of Climate Solutions. Hi, Meredith. Tell us just a little bit about Climate Solutions and your initial thoughts.
Great. And can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
Okay. My computer was sounding like a jet taking off a minute ago, so that's good. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Connolly, the Oregon Director of Climate Solutions. We are a nonprofit that focuses on accelerating clean energy policies to address the climate crisis in Washington and Oregon. And we work with policymakers, utilities, stakeholders, many who are a part of this panel, community partners, and others to pass equitable climate policies in the energy, transportation, and building sectors that move our state and region forward. Thinking about what excites me the most about this policy, I started to just think about all the benefits that will come to Oregon, and there's too many to list, but it's also just a critical foundation to our decarbonization and transition as a region. 100% clean policy is the backbone of a clean energy economy. We need this foundation of a zero carbon grid in order to cleanly power our transportation sector and increasingly our buildings and industry. And this is how we truly transition our state's economy from relying on fossil fuels. And clean electricity is reliable and affordable electricity for the long haul. And this policy can also, of course, help deploy clean energy projects, more efficiency, solar, wind, storage, and these economic development opportunities can accrue in every corner of Oregon. And the communities across Oregon can gain greater resilience. We can create good family wage jobs as we rebuild our economy post-pandemic. Those are just some of the reasons that we need to be really prioritizing this policy as we stair-step our way toward decarbonization. My biggest concern is this policy is the timeline that we act on, and both the political will to prioritize this climate action and what kind of transition we will have if we don't intentionally center equity and workers and the communities most impacted by the climate crisis and the energy system. And I think Oriana and Ranfis both spoke very eloquently about the needs and opportunities for an equitable and just transition to 100% clean energy. So I'll focus on the timeline issue. By that, I mean both how many decades are we planning on it taking for us to get to 100% clean electricity, and when will the legislature pass this policy? So I'll defer the second question, but on the first one, I do want to remind everyone that 7 other states have already passed this 100% clean electricity policy. We are the last state now on the West Coast, which pains me. I'm a competitive person. I love Oregon having a leadership edge. And this isn't a question about Oregon leading. It's a response to Oregon falling behind. Oregon needs to regain this leadership edge. And if we join with Washington, who has already passed this policy, we would make the Pacific Northwest the first region in the country to go 100% clean. I think that's incredibly powerful and important right now with the backdrop of federal action on the horizon as well. Unfortunately, because as we know, the climate science and the impacts make clear, these next years are critical for determining what kind of world we leave for our kids, and also what kind of state we have just in the coming decades of our own lifetimes. And so we have to act now. We have to figure out these issues. They're all solvable because we need to avoid the truly catastrophic effects of the climate crisis in Oregon. These Labor Day fires that we experienced so acutely were just the most recent terrifying reminder of the trajectory we're currently on. So while Oregon's grid is about halfway there on the trajectory to 100% clean, and coal phasing out will continue to bring us closer, we still don't have a plan for gas, and we don't have a plan for gas plants for market purchases of gas in our system currently. And gas use in our system has continued to rise in our power sector over the past several years. The Oregon Department of Energy, if you go to their website to our electricity mix, you can see as coal use has started to retract over time, our gas use has increased. And right now we don't have a policy in place that sets a new North Star there. There's also another gas plant getting its permits near Boardman right now, hoping to be built. So when I talk about timing and concerning, I mean, what infrastructure decisions are we making right now that will make a new trajectory possible or lock in pollution for future generations? So I hope we don't kick the can down the road. I hope we pass this policy and start to chart this new course, a new North Star of zero carbon, 100% clean electricity with an equitable and just transition along that path. So thank you for having this conversation today. It's very exciting.
Thank you very much, Meredith. Lastly, not least, I'd like to hear from Nicole Hughes of Renewable Northwest. Hello, Nicole.
Hi, Senator Golden. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be involved with this discussion. Renewable Northwest is a nonprofit that represents renewable energy industry as well as environmental nonprofit organizations. The footprint that we work in includes Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And our mission is to decarbonize the region through acceleration of transition to clean energy. So the work we do is focused on policy development, engagement in the regulatory process, and on identifying market and transmission opportunities for renewable generation. Specifically, the role I see us playing in this discussion in Oregon is that we're coordinating a study which will look at the different options Oregon has for reaching 100% decarbonized electricity sector. We've just kicked that study off and expect to have preliminary results in the February timeframe. Just to note that all the organizations on this panel are represented on our technical review committee for the study and will have a role in development of scenarios and informing the study. I think what excites me the most, I think Meredith said it really well, is bringing Oregon up to par in the region on clean energy. We have a strong base in this state of clean energy. We made some good early investments in renewables, but we have fallen behind many other states in terms of investment in renewable energy, as well as clean energy mandates. In terms of the concerns, I just want to start by saying everything that's been brought up so far, all the concerns that have been raised are valid and need to remain top of mind as we move forward. But I'm confident that we can have success with the group of informed and dedicated advocates that you've brought together here. And we are committed to collaborating with these groups. So I'm going to raise one concern that hasn't really been addressed specifically yet. It's been talked about, and that's this concern about losing sight of Oregon's role in a larger regional energy market. We believe that in order to decarbonize our sector in the most affordable and equitable manner, we need to ensure that our actions in this state are compatible with what's going on in the rest of the region. We want the entire West to be decarbonized and to ensure that the mandates we pass in Oregon are mindful that what we do here in Oregon does have an effect on the rest of the region, and that we rely on our regional neighbors for a lot of the energy that Oregonians use today. So while we totally agree with all the other concerns that have been mentioned, I just wanted to put that one out there, that consistency in the region in terms of how we get to a decarbonized grid is important, because we do live in a reality of a regional electricity grid. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That is our panel. What a panel. So I have a number of questions. I think other folks watching have a number of questions as well, but there's one I think that's overarching for me that I want to at least put on the table. You may or may not have an immediate response. If you don't, I'm going to come back before we're done and try it again. But as I look forward to legislation, I'd like to know your sense of, based on what you just heard, based on your long experience, of what the greatest challenges are going to be in terms of formulating a critical mass of support among all your constituencies. I think that there's what I'm hearing is strong interest from everybody in achieving 100% clean. And you all have there's diverse missions on this panel and diverse responsibilities. So as you listen, I'm asking for a little forewarning for legislators. What are the challenges among us in coming together that will be needed to be addressed as we move to finalizing policy? Sort of to Meredith's point that one of the timelines is, when can the legislature act on significant policy? An answer to that is when, we can align the significant stakeholders enough to do it. So what are the landmines ahead based on what you've heard and your work over the years? Does anybody want to take a crack at that? Not everyone at once, please. I'm looking for hands. And I will come back to it. Nicole, you want to give it a shot?
Sure. I'll just want to mention that there's a few other folks on this call that were involved in development of the Clean Energy Transformation Act in Washington. And there were some lessons learned in that process. So we are having conversations in Oregon with the stakeholders in this group right now that are sort of tackling some of those questions early so that we're not left to rulemaking at the end to hash some of them out. I think that some of the things we've heard today, costs, are these mandates achievable, which we can talk about and which we can look at in the study that we're hosting. Reliability is going to be a really important thing to keep top of mind. Technology agnostic, we've already heard, but also this dynamic over, and this may get too technical here, but I just want to raise it. How you account for greenhouse gas emissions in a clean energy standard is going to be something that we need to tackle early in the process, because it's in a couple of the states that have passed legislation, they kind of got to the end point and then there was like a misunderstanding about what it actually meant to pass a clean energy standard and get those effective greenhouse gas accounting methodologies. And so now they're tackling that in rulemaking. So I just want to raise that as one of the challenges.
Thank you. Scott.
Yeah, Senator Golden, I would build on what Nicole said. There's a lot that I agree with there. I think I think there's two kind of big themes to keep in mind as policymakers look at what is kind of the practical next step in Oregon's energy policy evolution. And the first one is time. So, if as climate science, continues to become, more broadly accepted, and, the metrics and the need to kind of bend the heat curve, if you will, starts running, closer and closer to critical dates. And so we're hearing, X percentage by 2030, X percentage by 2035, 2040, the next 10 to 15 years are pretty critical to really wring out as much carbon as can be, technically and economically accomplished. There's not a lot of time between now and then. And so, some of the, my biggest concern as you take on this discussion is complexity is actually the enemy of progress right now. We are seeing progress. We do have a foundation that's working. We are, making great strides, and really, just Monday morning, we were integrating 2,100 megawatts of new wind onto our system. We turned it on for the first time. I mean, that's just a massive amount of new energy, new clean energy coming in. And, we're starting to integrate and move that around and make that, part of our system. But every time there's a major policy shift, we look at years to fully go through the rulemakings, the regulatory processes, the adjustments to business plan, the ability to, raise capital, do the RFPs, have markets respond. So if the goal is rapid, then the policy measure should be fairly straightforward and simplistic, and should build on the foundations of what we know work. So that's one of the perspectives that we bring to this. I think the other piece is there is a changing the energy market, the electricity market has changed dramatically as a result of renewables and just the number of new generators connected to the grid and the removal of fuels from the grid. And so I'll give you one quick example that kind of informs this. It used to be that the cheapest energy to use was in the middle of the night when demand was low, because you pay for fuel generally. And that's how the system is run for decades and decades. And so, if you got to time of use pricing, or if you tried to incentivize, the use of the system with cost, you would make electricity the most expensive at, the end of the middle of the day when demand was high, and you would encourage use in the middle of the night when demand was low. With renewables, and when they appear on the system, we're now seeing circumstances where there's so much renewable energy coming on at certain times during the day when you have a lot of solar, for instance, on the system, that you actually want to drive demand into times that you never used to before. So it used to be the economy would react to, when energy was cheap. Now it's kind of flipping. Now we're needing to work with our customer base to help us manage these systems better and take advantage of the price differentials when things are cheap or when things are expensive, and when we may have more stresses on the system in new ways. And so I raised that here simply because it's kind of an academic forum, and we had a lot of that in the last panel, but also these are considerations that haven't been very heavily considered in past policy discussions, and I think need to be spent more time on here, because some of the solutions that made a lot of sense, 5-10 years ago, aren't necessarily that aligned with kind of the dynamics of the energy market today. And so the economics of building a new power plant may not be as attractive as the economics of coming up with new systems to change demand on the customer side. And so, the economic opportunity or value proposition is changing because of that market. And I would encourage stakeholders and lawmakers to really get, more insight into what that market's looking like, so we're not working at cross purposes.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on likely future challenges, gaps that are going to need to be bridged? I see Oriana's hand. Yeah, hi, Oriana.
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of folks who can give really technical answers on this panel. And as Scott pointed out, this is an academic and technical space, but I want to focus on the challenge that's a little bit more process oriented and a little bit more oriented with like the vision and the values associated with what a policy looks like. And that's, people have to be able to see themselves in this policy. And that happens on 3 levels. First, all of the stakeholders in this conversation need to be able to see themselves in this policy. The consumer and utilities need to know that this is not going to impact BPA rates in a way that harms their utility and then harms ratepayers in the process. The investor and utilities in this space need to have that sense of simplicity, and that this is going to function with systems as they exist now, but also how they're going to function in the future, and in particular, what planning is going to look like for our system and resource mix. And the advocates in this conversation need to be able to see that the values that they hold very strongly, whether it be emissions reductions and mitigating the climate crisis, to jobs and workforce equity, to just equity and justice more broadly. Like, we all need to be able to see ourselves in this policy. And similarly, legislators need to be able to see themselves in this policy. They need to be able to see that this is real jobs and real economic opportunity in their communities, in every single district in the state. And we believe that a 100% policy that's passed in a just manner that really focuses on creating good jobs and economic opportunity in every district in the state can truly achieve that vision. And finally, I think all of the people listening and all of the constituents who are impacting and speaking to legislators about this work, or just embodying what happens with the policies that we make, who are impacted by the work that we need to do, see themselves in this policy. They see themselves taking a job in renewable energy, or taking a job in energy efficiency installations, or taking a job in making homes healthier and safer at a time when that's more important than ever, as I think we were hearing in the earlier panel. People need to be able to see themselves in this future that we're creating through a 100% policy. And that's at every level, from the folks who are at the negotiating table hashing this out, to the decision makers who are passing the policy and need to know that it benefits their communities, to the actual communities. And so I think that's the biggest challenge that we see beyond any wonky technical detail, is just helping to have this vision be as expansive as possible. And while we can't necessarily bring along everybody in every single way and answer every concern that comes up in a policy, in particular in that interest of simplicity, I think we believe that we can do our best to ensure that everybody's voice is incorporated. And I think, just as an ask to the folks in this conversation who we've talked to in various capacities, I hope that coming out of this conversation today, every organization on this panel, and maybe also listening, can commit to working together to try to create the best possible policy, and then passing that best possible policy this session in a way that really reflects the values and needs that come up for your particular stakeholder, but then also leaves room for other stakeholders' values and vision and needs as well.
I just want to ditto with Oriana's comment. I think this is really true for, true for many of our labor partners in the labor movement. Like, I think it's really important that whether you're an electrician, a plumber, a pipe fitter, an operating engineer, a carpenter, that you see yourself as part of a climate actor in this, and how we address and help Oregon decarbonize. So it's really going to be important, regardless whether we take a regional approach, to make sure that we're able to spell out what those potential projects could look like in Oregon, whether it's in Eastern Oregon, our coastal communities, and our rural communities. And whether they're large scale or community scale, and really begin to connect the dots and the power of those projects to transform our lives and our communities. And I think it's going to be really critical, especially in a very polarized debate that we're in on climate, where folks are really feeling this push and pull tug around climate action, which is the fear of losing one's own job, as well as the debate between what are those promised future jobs that could replace them. And I think there is a lot of hand wringing even within our state when we see wind projects or solar projects coming mainly from migratory workers going from state to state. Like, legislators need to make sure that we're setting apprenticeship goals, ensuring that local workers are able to work on those projects. Knowing that we'll still need out-of-state workers, but we do need to train a future local workforce. And it's not enough to build a project in Southern Oregon when workers from Southern Oregon are not able to work on those projects. And as an alum of the University of Oregon, I would have loved to have known of an apprenticeship program where you earn as you learn, not having to pay out of pocket to be trained in an industry where, if you're an electrician or, pipe fitter, you could be being paid, close to $40, $50 an hour and getting benefits that get you on a path to retirement. And that's so critical even during this pandemic, when people in next generation thinking about potentially going to college, they're probably rethinking about going into debt. That, the clean energy future, if there's a path to get to these trainings, that's going to be critical. And I think there's going to be folks who are going to say, if you start layering in standards, that's going to raise the cost of these projects. But the data shows and the research shows that's not the case. And UC Berkeley has come up with great reports on this. But before I digress on this point, I just want to echo, I think, again, to the point that Oriana said, is we need workers and communities to be able to see themselves as climate actors. And it's really true in the labor movement, and what the power is to transform our lives.
Thank you, Ranfis. I'm going to go to Bob next, but first I want to say I really hope I could hear from everybody on this question. This not entirely comfortable question about where the tensions are going to be. Maybe it's a matter of tensions among different objectives we have, or trade-offs, or Ranfis just suggested that there's one thing that's presented as a trade-off that may not be a trade-off at all. But where are the rough spots likely to be? I want to finish the session on a higher note, but I like your sense of your early warning systems on where the tough spots are going to be. Bob, was your hand up there?
Yes. No, I think to me there's a piece that we're behind on in this, and people are starting to try to figure out, but is the customer side. We know what utilities need to do in terms of generation. We know solar, we know wind, we know even batteries. But to make this work, we're going to end up having to change a lot of customer equipment. People are going to need heat pump water heaters that are grid connected. They're going to need heat pumps for heating and cooling in buildings, and those should be grid connected. And so we're talking in a lot of homes, thousands of dollars of investment that in the traditional way we fund things is the homeowner or the landlord's responsibility. And how do we incentivize? How do we get those things done? And how do we do that in a way that's not creating a huge burden for the folks who can't afford a $5,000 heat pump? So how do we start to make that transition now? Because in 10 years, we're going to need that transition to have happened if we're going to get to 100% clean. We need efficient grid-connected equipment in the places where we use energy. And that's the side of the conversation I think that has to move faster. We have to think about, we have to figure out how are we helping to finance that? Who's responsible to finance that? And we need to get people thinking about it. People think a lot more about solar and wind as a solution, that people don't think a whole lot about heat pump water heaters and things like that as fundamental needs for getting to 100% clean energy.
Thanks, Bob. Sonia, I think I saw your hand, and let me ask you on my notes here, I have it as Sunny, and on the screen I see it as Sonia. What's right here?
Well, Sania is my given
Sania.
name.
Yeah.
And Sunny is what I generally go by.
Great, thank you.
But
Please.
either work well. So I guess I'll chime in on a couple of thoughts. One, I don't think that the difficulty for, at least for us, is going to be around labor standards. The how or what the verbiage is will matter. We've got a point of view. In fact, we have developed some language ourselves, but that fundamental concept that there should be a future for organized labor and for fair wages and project labor agreements and training programs to ensure that folks have a part of the development of renewable resources is front and center in our list of priorities. And in fact, in the course of this year, PGE adopted our own internal guidelines to really shift and guide both our procurement of larger projects through RFPs and our own sort of development work on things like when we're building the integrated operations center or future projects. We would like to see something similar adopted into law, and are putting forward one version for sure. With regard to sort of the larger policy and rubs, things to be worked out, Nicole certainly alluded to one of them. We have a pretty strong interest in focusing on emissions reduction. We're looking to what Colorado did in terms of identifying a reduction in emissions as a thing that you're asking your utility to do. We think that's going to be more straightforward. It's going to allow us to leverage existing systems and put accountability on those. To Scott's point about not wanting to lose a bunch of time to go through a whole lot of process, creating new systems and working out complexities, with putting a new procurement standard on top of an existing procurement standard. I think in some ways we're a little bit different than Washington. Their RPS, I think, ran out of steam in 2020. Ours is 50% by 2040. I don't know if that changes or not, but I think there's a lot of complexity in, say, taking a new procurement standard that's REC-based and putting it on top of that and trying to harmonize the whole thing. And frankly, I think what we know is that what our customers want is to know that they're being served with carbon-free power. They want to know the emissions are leaving the system. So let's focus on that outcome. One of the other I think, very important virtues of that is if you're focused on that outcome, you are automatically putting more strongly in the mix demand response, energy efficiency, all of these other grid sort of and customer sided opportunities that I think Bob was talking about, because they can all bring value in reducing emissions on the system. And if you're just solely focused on procuring renewables as the thing that you're measuring, then you have to bolt on all of this other stuff to get at the other outcomes, because of course we know that people want us to do all of those things. So again, in the interest of simplicity, we're really encouraging in these conversations that we focus on the outcome, that we're legally accountable to the outcome. In fact, we would be just fine if our 80% reduction for 2030 was the law. It would help us to bring it to life and make it happen and move the actions that are going to need to happen through our planning processes with stakeholder input and through the commission, so we can just get it done.
Thank you. If I don't see any more, yeah, I see one more hand, and then we got some really good attendee questions I'd like to get to, but Jason, it's yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off of Bob Jenks's comments. Just to point out, we have to remember the way we pay for things in decarbonization is really important, equity and fairness. And, it's important to remember ratepayers and taxpayers are different. I'm not an expert on tax policy, but, they tell me that our tax policy strives to be progressive, based on different income levels. Rates are different. We've actually done some work related to our studying how we might change our rates in the future that shows, someone's energy consumption and say income levels, there's no real correlation. You have people that might be pretty low energy users that actually live in a very large house and are very affluent people. Conversely, someone could be living in a very small residence that's somewhat dilapidated and not energy efficient and have a quite large bill. So things like that, we need to be mindful of in things like resiliency measures that have energy components. Is it appropriate for the electric rate base, or are those things that should be, from the property tax base, from local governments? I think that's a very important conversation for us to have in mind. Also, I did want to just talk a little bit about, hydropower. I think Oriana made some really good points, and I did want to address those. I think any energy resource should always be accountable and carry responsibility for fish and wildlife impacts or impacts on cultural resources that are important to Northwest tribes. I don't think, though, that clean energy policy, say 100% clean, for example, is the appropriate venue to really answer questions about how do we balance clean energy production interests with those fish and wildlife and cultural resource interests. There are other venues to do that. So, and I think really often those issues are best addressed on individual project basis. I've been through a hydropower relicensing effort for a hydropower project. I know we had crucial conversations with stakeholders about how to achieve that balance for one of our own resources. There are venues to do that. And in as far as the federal hydropower system goes, to some extent, conversations about that balance have been handled in the courtroom quite often. I'm speaking here through at a University of Oregon Law School event. I don't need to tell you that obviously our judicial system plays an important role in our system of government, but occasionally the judicial system is not, it can be somewhat of a blunt object for trying to achieve policy balance, and doesn't always lend to collaboration the same way that the legislative branch or other collaborative environments do. So right now we're at a really pivotal moment for the federal system. We have a new operating plan for the Columbia River system, but it's a bridge. It's an interim approach it makes sense now, but folks in the region are ready to have a conversation about how we balance power interests, fish and wildlife interests, and cultural resource interests on a more long-term basis. And we're hopeful that Oregon can try to come to the table with a collaborative approach among the 4 states, Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Oregon, and use a more strategic collaborative approach instead of finding ourselves back in the courtroom where, again, it can be somewhat of a blunt instrument. So hopeful that happens.
I saw one more hand, and then I'd like to go to the attendee questions. And I'm going to give you a heads up, time permitting, and we have a little more than a half hour. I'm going to ask a final question, a wrap-up question, and it's self-interested, and there are a number of legislators watching the call. And that is, if there were one thing you think it's most important for legislators to keep in mind as we forge ahead on this policy, what is it? That's the closer. Meredith, you had a comment, and then we'll go to attendee questions.
Sure. Thanks everyone for flagging a lot of those kind of landmines or big points of conversation here. I think the one other that I would raise is really the timelines and what we set our sights on for when we get to a zero carbon grid. And I think Scott rightly mentioned, interim as well. How do we really focus on going as quickly as possible, which doesn't just mean a target 2 decades or more in the future, but also something sooner that really starts to draw down our fossil fuel use and our emissions from our grid. So I think that's incredibly important as we think about, we continually set these timelines, these targets, they feel like a stretch goal, and then we beat them. And what we see from deep decarbonization policy models across the Northwest and across other parts of the country is that we know how to get, with existing technology and at existing costs and all of those pieces in place, we can get to 96% clean grid. So I hope we don't get tripped up on that last few percentage that I have no doubt that we will be able to figure out the right technological path along the way over the next couple decades as businesses, as the markets, as everyone gets the signal that we're going to figure this out together, we're going to get there. We've seen the solar cost curve come down in a similar fashion. Batteries are doing the same now. And I think that's an incredibly important point. We know Oregonians overwhelmingly want us to figure it out. They want the smart people to get in a room and figure it out and not give excuses and not delay. And so I think just like past energy and climate policy, it behooves all of us to work together to figure out these very real issues that people are raising that are not insurmountable. We have to figure them out together. And so I hope we come out on the other end with an ambitious and collaborative policy that reestablishes Oregon's leadership edge.
Thank you. We've got more good questions and we're going to be able to cover them. This is a big one, but let's see what your brief thoughts are. 100% clean energy standard will require many gigawatts of new generation capacity within the next couple of decades. Is each of the utility scale technologies, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, et cetera, equally positioned to meet those goals? Which is most likely to deliver the most economic benefits, particularly to impacted communities? Scott Bolton.
Sure, I'll answer this one as quick as I can. Certainly offshore wind has yet to really prove its economic competitiveness. There may be some demonstration projects if there's federal assistance or something like that in the near term, but I think what I'm excited about and what is, I think, a big contributor to getting towards these goals is, we're learning to squeeze more efficiency out of the system. We just repowered our entire wind fleet. And that basically just means we've upgraded, like you upgrade your laptop, we popped the tops off of all of our wind turbines across the West, put in new equipment. We're able to generate, about 20 to 25% more energy as a result of those investments, using the same landscape footprint we already had in the same transmission system we were already interconnected to, and able to restart the clock on the 10-year production tax credit doing it. That's something that, wasn't a maneuver that we really contemplated back in 2007 when we passed the original RPS. But based on what we know, based on technology, based on kind of the supply chain, really understanding the value of, kind of repurposing, or not repurposing, but upgrading existing infrastructure, we were able to do that. So I like that idea that we can squeeze more out of existing infrastructure, and we can also do that through the markets. Having more efficient markets that, not just use energy better and differently, but also rationalizing where the next infrastructure is really needed, whether that's a transmission line or a battery. That's going to yield favorable economics as well. So, not all these technologies are created equally. Too much solar in one place isn't a good thing. Too much wind in one place is a good thing. Diversity and spreading out, these resources seems to be where the most value is, if you can economically tie it all together and manage it.
Thanks. Nicole.
Thank you, Senator Golden. So just to build off of what Scott said, diversity is very important, but we also need to look at how can we rethink our infrastructure, our existing grid, how we interact with customers on the demand side to really take advantage of that diversity. So for example, well, I think just first of all, I want to say that all of these technologies play a role, but I think there is a huge opportunity in Oregon for solar that's closer to load, that's on our distribution system, to really meet the need of communities in ways that we haven't really realized yet. So using a community solar project as a tool for resiliency, or using a solar project on the end of a distribution system as sort of a net loading tool for some of our rural co-ops and munis. And so, but we can only do that if we start looking we start looking at those systems differently. If we start saying that this distribution system was only supposed to be taking power in one direction and serving rural customers, if we start looking at it as an opportunity to develop resiliency in our rural communities, I think solar has a huge opportunity to address the equity in that question that came up from the attendee.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question. Was there, Ranfis, was that you?
Yeah, I'll try to be really brief. Love to provide sort of a worker perspective on economic benefits, because I think the answer sounds different depending on who the actor is. But from a worker perspective, projects that are larger in scale, I think you're just involving different types of classified workers. So I'll point out, like offshore wind, you have the potential for getting different kinds of workers, electricians, potentially operating engineers, folks erecting the specialized equipment, iron workers, folks fabricating. But then you have the potential for, say, like manufacturing. So for a coastal community that's been impacted by seeing paper mills being closed down, the opportunity to potentially fabricate or produce some of those winds near the site. That's an economic opportunity that I don't think we'll see in, say, just building solar large scale or residential scale solar. Same could be said around like storage technologies, whether we're talking about hydrogen, battery, or even pump storage. There are different classified types of jobs that could be created that you'll see different actors seeing themselves as part of climate action. With all that said, of course, there'll be some nuts and bolts on how you finance those projects, making sure there's not a burden to ratepayers, and making sure that they're being properly cited responsibly to make sure there's no huge conflicts as those projects are being developed. But I think there is a different calculus for workers and how they can see themselves in these jobs, both in construction, operations, maintenance, and even potentially manufacturing. So I know we've talked a lot about construction jobs, but there are special types of projects that might involve fabrication, manufacturing that might appeal to different communities and the local workforce needs. So just wanted to provide that worker perspective for a state like Oregon.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little with another question. At this point in the journey, what is the role of conservation it seems renewables get far more attention than conservation. I'll just add on, I don't think I've heard much today about weatherization of existing buildings, retrofits, but who would take a crack at that?
I'd love to take that one.
Yeah, go.
This is Bob Jenks. The energy efficiency is a critical component of what we've been doing. As I said, when I said in my introduction that in PGE, bills have gone down as we've implemented decarbonization up to that point. A lot of the reason bills went down is because of the massive investment we've been making in energy efficiency. Tens of millions of dollars a year are being made on the IOU level into energy efficiency investments, and we're driving down low. The average house today uses 20% less electricity than it did in 1990 in Oregon. The Pacific Northwest is the only region of the country that has done that. You can go back to the Northwest Power and Conservation Act in 1980 as starting that, but that's as a core part of what we do. Part of the reason we don't talk about is we do a lot of it. I think the question came from Craig Patterson. I do agree that he addresses and identifies a problem really in sort of the public power where there's less of this investment being made by some, and some utilities are putting really high monthly customer charges on, which take a lot of your bill into something that you can't save money through energy efficiency on. And so I agree with Craig in that one of the policies we ought to do is keep customer charges low and keep the charges onto energy bills where you're motivating people and giving people incentives and creating benefits for people who do invest in efficiency, because efficiency, the lower we reduce demand, the better system we are. If we hadn't been doing this over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we would have more coal plants that we have to retire from the 80s. We would have more gas plants from the 90s and aughts that we were having to deal with. And so every step of the way, we would have a larger and larger problem that we're trying to address and back out of. So this is critical to what we're doing, and we need to continue it. And so I think that we sometimes forget about it, but I think we should never forget about it. This is our most important, in my mind, tool for keeping bills affordable as we go forward and make this transition.
Sunny, I think I saw your hand, and I'm glad, because I'm wondering what the IOU perspective on this question is.
Yeah, it's our delighted to maybe add a little more color on what Bob is saying about it is what we do. So, in terms of what the law says, right, a number of years ago in what we all refer to as 838, we created the ability for utilities to collect in rates funding to get all cost-effective energy efficiency. And then some years later in what we all talk about as 1547, which expanded the RPS, we put express language in there, and the nod goes to Northwest Energy Coalition for saying, I want this in there. Language that says that utilities will get, right, we have a mandate to get all cost-effective energy efficiency. We were all for that because frankly, that's how the system functions right now. From just for folks who don't sort of look under the hood for utility and ETO operations, the way that goes is that we work collaboratively with the ETO. They in our integrated resource planning processes on that regular cycle, where they identify all cost-effective energy efficiency, and we build it into the planning process. It is our first and least expensive resource, in other words. So when we look at how we're going to fill our need, we have already built in an assumption about all cost-effective energy efficiency right off the top. And then the ETO has an obligation to go get that for us. And their budget, their planning cycles around budget are geared to getting all of that cost-effective energy efficiency and delivering it, because we're relying on it as a system. So it's very much just embedded in sort of the day-to-day and how we operate for the regulated utilities in Oregon, with great results, frankly.
I just might point out that as part, go ahead, Jason's gonna make my.
Jason, yes, then Jennifer.
Real quickly, I wanted to gently push back on what Bob Jenks said. I just say gently because he's right. Energy efficiency is just as important as ever. I just wanted to point out, there can be a conundrum for utilities. Our rate structures worked pretty well for, almost a century. And today, Scott Bolton talked a little bit about how different the grid is in markets and hours of the day with all the changes to our electric system. Yes, I guess it's nice to send a price signal to use less electricity, but we're also trying to convince people that transportation electrification is a good thing, and get an electric car, use more electricity. And so, there's no easy solutions for redesigning our rates for this modern era. There's a lot of tough choices and competing priorities and goals. And it's a complicated time. Energy efficiency is very, very important. It'll always be the backbone of decarbonization. But, I could say demand response is equally important. Again, you heard Mr. Bolton talk about changes. We really, it's not just energy efficiency at any hour. There's times of the day or the year that's even more important than ever. So demand response, the idea that you can throttle load, not just your generation, is very important. Synchronizing load and resources is so crucial in today's world.
Yeah, Jennifer.
I was just going to point out that we also on the COU side have investments in conservation as well through our BPA rates. They actually carve out a certain proportion that, is assigned to each utility to achieve, I guess, their targets. And to the extent that those can't be achieved because they've done all the measures that they can in their small community, they can give it to other utilities to meet those targets. So we are doing stuff on the COU side too. I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Well, we have 15 more minutes. I saw your hand, Oriana. And after Oriana's comment, I want to go to counseling for legislators. So what I have in mind is, what do you think the low-hanging fruit might be legislatively that's important? Low-hanging good fruit. And I'm a little curious. I don't think we're going to have much time for this. Looks like we're turning a page, perhaps, in climate and energy policy from the federal government. And if you think that calls for reassessing the state role at all. And then just an open question, what do you most want legislators to keep their eye on over the 2021 session in this context? So think about that. I'm going to ask each of you for a minute or two of counseling. But Oriana, I saw your hand a moment ago.
Yeah, I want to jump in quickly here so we have time for those other really important questions to answer. But just in giving a plug around conservation and weatherization, I want us to think about it not just in terms of how it helps us reduce emissions by reducing load, but also that it has an incredible amount of co-benefits from a health and safety perspective for people's homes. Weatherization work can be paired with things like pulling out people's carpet that has an asthma trigger, addressing mold, structural repairs. We unfortunately don't have a really good pot of money yet to do that work. And that's one of the things that we're working on for this coming legislative session. But energy efficiency is also, from the work that CAP agencies do, a really good entry point to address other health and safety or just life issues that come up for folks. Because when you're doing an assessment for someone's home for weatherization, it's an opportunity to see their home and see what's going on in their lives. So I think that sometimes, as much as we value renewable energy, something that we don't always value enough with conservation and weatherization, that it creates a really direct and personal link in the work that's being done. And it's not always as sexy as renewables to kind of change installation, but it can have such a profound impact, not just in terms of reducing the number of electrons we need to deploy and reducing the amount of generation we need from an emissions perspective, but it has those really, really important benefits for communities. And that can be a challenge with the cost effectiveness piece, because our cost effectiveness tests don't necessarily value that impact that it has on someone's life in terms of not just lowering an energy bill, but reducing other costs that come up, and just the cost of being able to keep your thermostat a little bit higher. It can increase health outcomes extraordinarily. And in this moment, when we're in a respiratory pandemic, being able to improve indoor air quality, being able to improve respiratory health, being able to improve heart health can have really, really big impact. So in plugging conservation and weatherization, I want to remind folks that it's not just about the grid, but it also has a really important impact for people.
You are on mute, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks, Oriana. Who's willing to go first on helping to focus our thoughts in Salem as we start a session here pretty quickly? Bob Jenks.
Yeah, I'm willing to go first, and then people can disagree with me as we go around. To me, the most important thing that the legislature can do is what I think the legislature is really good at, and that's provide standards. Tell us what emission path they want. What do they want us to do? Tell us what they wanted to do. If they want local investment as a piece of that, tell us what local investment you want. If you want labor standards, tell us what labor standards you want. Tell us the elements. And give us the standards that we need, but then give us the flexibility to meet those standards. We're going to have a different solution in PacifiCorp than we will for PGE, than we will for Eweb, and our ability to match up with any kind of federal requirements and federal programs that come out are going to be easier if we have flexibility. We do good planning. We have stakeholders get together and can solve problems, but we need the laws to give us the flexibility to do that. So my best advice to the legislature is give us the standards that you want. And the standards can be, some of the standards can raise costs. I mean, there's a variety of things. But tell us what you want us to do, and then give us the flexibility to go out and figure out the best way to do it, and recognize the answer in 5 or 6 or 7 years may be different than what we think it is today. So that flexibility can become really, really important.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. That's a good start. Who's next?
I could just pipe in and just say that the one thing I would want legislators to keep in mind is, not all utilities are in the same position in terms of how far we have to go in terms of our carbon. Our only thermal component is what BPA has to buy on the market. So I guess making sure to chime on to what Bob was saying, we do need flexibility in how the carbon neutral standard is rolled out. We should be able to buy RECs versus build projects. It shouldn't be a one size fits all. It doesn't make sense for where, there's small utilities like the city of Drain versus a PGE. We're in very different positions. So I just hope that the legislature will keep that in mind as they put together their concept and standards.
Thank you, Jennifer. I know there's more advice out there than this. Meredith.
Well, Senator, since you asked about also whether the federal kind of picture reassesses our role, I think despite some of the recent, I don't know, what's the euphemism, complications in the Oregon legislature over the past few years, the reason we call them DC style antics is because it's even worse in Washington, DC. And I personally feel a little bit of that Georgia glow, hope, relief. I don't know the right term for it, but it was a little diminished today as well, but by the rest of the actions in DC. But I think all of those really show, we've never waited for the federal government to act, for Oregon to act in its own best interest. I am biased, but I think Oregon has the most beautiful place to protect, the best people to protect. We need to act. We can't wait for the federal government. And I also think it's in our best interest, as it has been in past policies, for Oregon to chart its own course. So what does 100% clean energy policy look like for us? And we've heard about some of these distinctions even between the different utilities. I would say there's also distinctions between different communities and what they need, different types of projects, different types of jobs. And we should be putting our own imprint on what that looks like. So for both those reasons, I don't think this should slow or change it. I think it does increase the inevitability of 100% clean policy federally, but doesn't change the reasons that Oregon should act now. So I just wanted to leave that parting thought. And the low-hanging fruit is that we have learned, Nicole raised some good points earlier of how we've learned from what other states have done. We are not going first here. There are many models out there for what we can do to get this policy right. And we have the advantage of actually being able to learn and tailor what works best for Oregon based on some of those different models.
Thank you. Yes, Jason.
Yeah, I would say because climate is a global issue, obviously Eweb would support national and global solutions. It doesn't need to be galactic, but we obviously know that we can't count on that. And there has, of recently, there has been a lead from the bottom up where states are taking the leadership role. States continuing to lead will only help keep momentum up at the federal level. And when we do see something achieved at the federal level, there's always the opportunity for states to make adjustments. But in the meantime, if it's to be the states that continue to lead, I just wanted to reemphasize one last time, regional consistency is really crucial. The more that states can align their policies, and we have neighbors we can work with in Washington and California, and other states may join, the more you can do to be regionally consistent, probably will go towards helping create healthy markets when those come along. And for the folks here that operate in more than one state, it's for the good of the order for the electric sector if states can be regionally consistent.
Great. We have 5 minutes. I would love to hear from the rest of you. Advice or closing comments? I see Nicole's hand.
I just wanted to remind everyone that it's maybe not, I don't know if calling it a low-hanging fruit is the right way to do it, but there's sort of a parallel piece of fruit, and that's the governor's executive order and on carbon emissions. And I just want to put a shout out to the importance of making sure that the state agencies that are charged with doing the work of reducing emissions and the work that they do remain funded for that work, that's really important, and that what we're doing here doesn't replace the work that's being done there. That we're talking about a clean electricity standard, which isn't going to be addressed in the governor's executive order actions, though some of the work that they'll be doing at the PUC will definitely be concurrent and compatible with this. But just wanted to say that's this medium hanging fruit that we got to make sure that these agencies are continually funded to do that good work.
Ranfis, thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, I just want to echo, definitely agree with comments from Bob, Jenks, and Meredith and Nicole here. I think I definitely want to say, we should definitely consider continue having state action. Even at BGA National, we're very excited for the potential for federal legislation, but we know that everything's influenced by state action. I think it's really critical that Oregon continues to lead where we can and where possible. And I would be, remiss to say that, I am a ratepayer and I am a taxpayer and I'm a worker and I don't live a siloed life. I expect my tax dollars and my ratepayer dollars to be stewarded with high standards and high expectations. I think for too long, many and as ratepayers, we have not received the benefits that we expect from our utilities. And I would be remiss to say, that a lot of the good work that I think some of our utility partners are highlighting has been years of advocacy from community groups, community leaders, folks who predate my time and folks who are probably on this call. So I want to acknowledge that. And I think my encouragement continually to the folks at the state is continue to set the table for leaders, different stakeholders to come together to advance an audacious agenda around how we address climate for our communities, for workers, and for the next generation. And I think that will be critical because I think the job now is not up to par with the standards that our communities are feeling, especially in our low-income communities. Like, we should expect more. And I think it's the state's responsibility to build that table for us and get us to all collaborate together. So I would hope at the end of the day that we're all working on a good policy together, whether it's BGA, with utilities and with our EJ partners and developers and labor. Like, I think we should all be continually taking the extra mile to come together and pass a policy that works for the next generation.
Great. Thank you for that. Who'd I miss? Down to a couple minutes. Don't regret not saying anything after all this. Is that Sunny?
Yep.
Go ahead, Sunny.
Well, I'll actually say that I think that we have an excellent history in the state of working collaboratively to create really good, strong, durable and workable energy policy. I think back all the way to 2007, when a whole bunch of us got around a table and hammered out what the renewable portfolio would look like. And it's happened again and again over the years, notably with another really large policy push on 1547 where we increased it. This is again the kind of policy where you absolutely want those folks around the table, which is happening now at last, to hammer out what it should look like and to ensure that it really is going to be workable and deliver the results that folks are looking for. It's a great history to build on. And I think everyone who's in the conversation at this point is pretty glad to be at the table and is focused on making sure that there are good outcomes and that the next iteration of really robust energy policy is well done. So I think that legislators should take some comfort that folks have come together a little bit late, honestly, but to try and sort of hammer out what that can look like. The other thing I would just throw out for legislators to keep in mind is that there are going to be other energy policy pieces out there that are important. For example, there is legislation that, hopefully passes finally addressing energy burden that, I think all of these stakeholders have been committed to for multiple sessions and really want to see go. And it's going to be very important for helping to address energy costs for folks who are struggling with energy burden as we continue to transform the system. You're going to see an effort to get an increase in the meter charge that funds energy assistance on a short-term basis. There's a commitment among the folks who were part of the OPUC process on COVID to commit to come in and try and get another $10 million of funding through. And so you'll see a coalition of a number of folks who are on this call now working on that. That is also really critical because people are struggling in the short term. There's been a more than a year-long effort, very collaborative table convened by the governor's office largely, but now I think led by Rep. Power around polypurpose charge modernization. Is a good piece of work. It's going to be important for that to be able to move forward. And there are certainly other issues that we're raising that are complementary to getting the system itself clean, to remove barriers to be able to better work with our customers on things like resiliency projects, on municipal green tariffs, making sure that we've got good labor standards, and making sure that all of the social and policy costs that we are asking the utility to deliver on are paid for by all customers, that no one can kind of escape to them. For example, if they're larger customers and can go to direct access, something we call non-bypassability. And so all of these things fit together. They all can work together to deliver better results and accelerate the effort to make this transformation happen, both inside the utility and on the customer side. So we look forward to having more conversation about how that all fits together.
Thank you. Us too, Sunny, in the legislature. We are at the end of our time, and this was a terrific panel. This was a terrific hour and 3/4. Thank you so much. And I'm going to speak for my colleagues and say we really look forward to working with you over the next few months to produce some good legislation. And I just also, in my last moment, let me really thank Heather Britton and Greg Dotson and Adele from the university, and from the legislative staff, Laura Kentness and Beth Petrino, for putting on this whole really valuable day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Golden. It's been a pleasure. I'm thrilled with how this day has turned out. I would like to also thank the panelists. It's been an exceptional conversation. And for closing remarks now, I'd like to invite back Professor Adele Amos.
Hello all, I'll be very brief. As we close, I just want to offer my thanks to everyone involved. It's been so valuable and really educational for me to be a part of this today, and I knew it would be, and I hope it has been the same for all of you. What I didn't know was that given today's events in DC, engaging in such a powerful conversation with you about the future has also been an antidote. So thank you all for all of that. It's been really inspiring to see stakeholders, government officials, and academics bringing their views and their expertise to a topic that's so relevant to our time. Senator Golden mentioned anchoring at the beginning of the day, mentioned anchoring public policy in good, sound information and helping to develop a shared knowledge base and ideas for proceeding in a way that's equitable and careful in analyzing the benefits and burdens of these new policies. That is exactly the kind of work we hope to contribute to with this environment initiative and the research and teaching that we do at the University of Oregon. Senator Dembro pointed out that the U of O has a long tradition of teaching and researching in this area and deep connections to the Oregon legislature. And that's so true. I've been here since 2005 and was a student before that and have been engaged in that work. But this new and long-term commitment from the provost to support and grow our work in this area is something that I'm really excited to be a part of, having been a student here and on the faculty since 2005. Especially to work on topics like helping Oregon's effort to lead as we chart a new decarbonized energy future. And lastly, just as the director of the Environment Initiative, and as Representative Power pointed out, I hope that we were able today on the U of O panel to share with you some of the expertise and capacity we have at the University of Oregon to bring to bear. We want to be a resource, including as a convener, to help set the table we were all talking about here at the end, to help inform the process. As we do the necessary work to address the urgent climate crisis, to prepare our students through experiential learning for this emerging world, and to do our part to create a just and sustainable future. So again, thank you all. Let's do this again soon. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Senator Dembro.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adele. I think, what you've just said really provides the proper capstone to this day. I think we've all learned an awful lot today, from our friends from the other states, from the U of O faculty, from this group that's before you that, I have the pleasure to work with most of them, on a regular basis. And I will say, I'm sure they were on their best behavior, but they really are this helpful and rational, and hopeful, I would say, on a regular basis, which makes me hopeful, especially, as you say, on this day, which is a very difficult day, frankly. And this is, what we're seeing happen in DC, and I'm afraid in Salem, is, a further, challenge to us, very similar to the challenges that we've been facing with climate action over the last couple of years. And a lot of it is rooted in a reluctance to pay attention to science and to pay attention to what we're learning from the fruits of academic research. And I think that, on this day, it's even more important that we recommit to research and the fruits of research and discussion and debate, bringing people together for that purpose. I will say I'm no longer chairing the Senate Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources. I'm now chairing the Senate Committee on Education, which makes me doubly proud to be part of this event because, something that the state really needs is the benefit of research from our research institutions to help us solve some of these tough social and technical problems, but also to bring value to the state. And so I'm looking forward to seeing more of this. Certainly one of the things that the legislature can do is pass good policy. And that's what we need to do. And that is a real focus for us. The other thing that the legislature can do is to help create forums like this. And I really want to thank Senator Golden for really being the ringleader in working to make this possible. Because I think it's going to be important for the legislature not only to be the policymakers, but also the conveners in bringing academics together with industry, together with advocates, together with just a whole variety of Oregonians to help us solve these problems. So I want to thank everybody who stuck with this. I don't know about you, my head is exploding with all that I've learned today, and really appreciate everyone who made this possible.
Thank you so much, Senator Denbrow. This concludes today's webinar. I did want to let you all know that we have recorded these proceedings and we will be posting them shortly for yourselves or others to watch at your leisure. And thank you again so much for joining us. Have a good day.